The furnace made a soft clicking sound that morning, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I should have paid attention to that sound. I should have known that something mechanical, something cold and deliberate, doesn't beat like a living thing. But I was too busy setting the table for Christmas breakfast, too focused on making everything perfect for my grandson's first holiday with his new wife. The click, click, click. I paused, my hand hovering over the silverware drawer. There was something wrong about that sound, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But then Marcus came bounding down the stairs. All smiles and easy charm, and I pushed the feeling away. "Morning, Grandma Rose," he said, kissing my cheek. His breath smelled like peppermint toothpaste. "Something smells amazing." "Cinnamon rolls," I said, forcing a smile. "Your favorite." "Where's Amber?" he asked, glancing toward the guest room where his wife was staying. "Still sleeping, I think. Let her rest. It's early." Marcus nodded and poured himself coffee. But I noticed his eyes kept drifting toward the basement door, toward the furnace room. And that's when I felt it again, that twist in my gut that told me something was terribly, terribly wrong. I'm Rose Whitaker. I'm 73 years old, and I've lived in this house in Portland, Oregon, for 48 years. I raised my grandson Marcus here after my daughter died in a car accident when he was 6. His father had disappeared before he was born, so it was just the two of us. I thought I knew him better than anyone. I thought I knew what kind of man I'd raised. I was wrong. The morning Marcus was born, my daughter Sarah brought him home wrapped in a blue blanket with little bears on it. He was so small, so perfect. Sarah was only 19, barely more than a child herself, but she looked at her baby with such fierce love that I knew everything would be okay. For 6 years, it was okay. We were a family. Sarah worked as a dental hygienist, and I watched Marcus during the day. He was a quiet child, watchful. He liked puzzles more than toys, patterns more than chaos. He could sit for hours arranging his blocks by color and size, never getting frustrated when they fell down. Then came the accident. Sarah's car went off the road during a rainstorm. The police said she hydroplaned, lost control. She died instantly. Marcus and I were alone. At first, I worried about him constantly. He didn't cry at the funeral. He stood next to me in his little suit, holding my hand, watching them lower his mother into the ground with those dark, steady eyes. When people came up to offer condolences, he thanked them politely. He was only 6, but he spoke like someone much older. "Don't worry, Grandma," he told me that night, as I tucked him into bed. "We'll be okay. We have each other." I hugged him tight, grateful that he was being so brave. I didn't realize then that it wasn't bravery. It was something else entirely. The first time I should have really seen it, was with the neighbor's cat. Mrs. Chen lived next door with her orange tabby, Butterscotch. That cat used to sun himself on our shared fence. And Marcus would stand there for long minutes, watching him. Mrs. Chen thought it was sweet, the way my grandson was drawn to animals. Then, one afternoon, I heard Mrs. Chen screaming. I ran outside and found her holding Butterscotch, sobbing. The cat was dead. She kept saying he must have eaten something poisonous in her garden, that it was her fault for not being more careful. Marcus stood on our porch, watching. When I asked him if he'd seen anything, he shook his head. "No, Grandma, I was doing homework." But later, much later, I remembered that his homework that day had been about the chemistry of household substances. He was 8 years old, reading at a high school level, and his essay was about antifreeze. When he was 12, our neighbor across the street, Mr. Patterson, a retired veteran who lived alone, died in his sleep. The coroner said it was a heart attack, not unusual for a 76-year-old man with a history of heart disease. But Mr. Patterson had just changed his will. I knew, because he'd asked me to witness it. He'd left a small inheritance to Marcus, thanking him in the document for being such a thoughtful young man, keeping an old soldier company. Marcus had been visiting Mr. Patterson once a week, playing chess with him, I'd been proud of my grandson's kindness. At the funeral, Marcus was solemn and respectful. He used his inheritance to buy a new laptop for school. Mr. Patterson would want me to use it for my education, he said. Everyone in the neighborhood talked about what a mature, responsible young man he was becoming. In high school, Marcus dated a girl named Jennifer. She was shy, sweet, from a wealthy family. They dated for 6 months, and Jennifer was crazy about him. Then suddenly, she broke up with him. She wouldn't say why, but I heard through the neighborhood gossip that she'd gotten very sick, some kind of mysterious stomach illness that hospitalized her for a week. The doctors never figured out what caused it. Marcus took the breakup in stride. Sometimes relationships don't work out, he told me with a shrug. 2 weeks later, he started dating Amanda, a girl whose father owned a chain of hardware stores. That relationship lasted until graduation. Marcus went to college on a scholarship, studied business and finance. He was brilliant with numbers, brilliant with people. He graduated with honors and got a job at an insurance company. He was good at his work, very good. He understood risk assessment, probability, patterns of human behavior. He understood how to make accidents look natural. 5 years ago, Marcus met Amber at a professional conference. She was 35, a successful real estate developer with a portfolio of properties worth millions. She'd been married before her first husband had died in a boating accident 3 years earlier. She told me about it over lunch, how devastating it had been, how she'd nearly given up on love until she met Marcus. "Your grandson is special," she told me, her eyes bright. "He's so attentive, so caring. He makes me feel safe." They got married last spring. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. Amber looked radiant in her white dress, and Marcus looked at her with such apparent devotion that I felt tears in my eyes. But I also noticed how carefully he'd positioned himself in her life, how he'd convinced her to update her life insurance policy, naming him as the primary beneficiary, how he'd suggested they get carbon monoxide detectors for her properties. Just to be safe, he'd said, how knowledgeable he was about gas leaks and furnace maintenance. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was an old woman seeing shadows where there were none. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger as the months passed. Then came Christmas. They arrived on Christmas Eve, planning to stay through the holiday. Amber hugged me tight, telling me how excited she was to celebrate with family. Marcus carried their bags upstairs, and I noticed him pause at the basement door. "How's the furnace running, Grandma?" he asked. "This old house must be hard to heat." "It's fine," I said. "The repairman was here just last month. Everything's working perfectly." Something flickered across his face. Disappointment? Frustration? It was gone so quickly I couldn't be sure. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I lay awake thinking about Mr. Patterson, about Jennifer's mysterious illness, about butterscotch, about my daughter Sarah's car accident on a road she'd driven 1,000 times before, about the life insurance policy Marcus had convinced me to update 6 months ago, about the way he'd asked about the furnace. At 3 a.m., I got out of bed and went downstairs. The house was quiet, everyone asleep. I stood in the kitchen, listening. And that's when I heard it. That soft clicking from the basement. Click, click, click. I opened the basement door slowly, quietly. The clicking grew louder as I descended the stairs. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The basement was dark except for the small indicator light on the furnace. I fumbled for the light switch. What I found made my blood run cold. The carbon monoxide detector had been disabled, not removed, just unplugged and carefully placed back on the wall so it looked functional. The furnace exhaust vent had been partially blocked with crumpled newspaper. Not enough to stop the furnace from running, but enough to back up the deadly gas into the house. And there, on the workbench, I found a set of tools and a printed diagram of furnace systems, with specific sections highlighted. My hands shaking, I cleared the vent and plugged the detector back in. Then I took photos with my phone. My grandson had tried to kill us all and make it look like an accident. The carbon monoxide would build up slowly overnight, painless and silent. By morning, we'd all be dead in our beds. But why kill me? I'd already updated my life insurance with him as the beneficiary. Then I realized he couldn't just kill Amber alone. That would look suspicious. But if we all died together, if I died too, it would look like a tragic accident. An old house, an old furnace, a holiday tragedy. No one would question it, and he would inherit everything. My house, my savings, Amber's millions. I stood there in that basement, surrounded by the evidence of my grandson's monstrous plan, and I felt something break inside me. The boy I'd raised, the child I'd loved and protected, he'd been planning to murder me as casually as he'd murdered Mr. Patterson, as he'd probably murdered his own mother. Oh God. Sarah's accident. The rain hadn't been that heavy that day. Sarah was a careful driver. But Marcus had been in the car with her, hadn't he? No, that's what we'd been told, that he'd been at school. But had anyone actually verified that? I'd been too grief-stricken to ask questions. I needed to think. I needed to be smart about this. If I confronted Marcus now, what would he do? Would he try to hurt me? Hurt Amber? I was 73 years old, and he was 32, strong and desperate. I went back upstairs as quietly as I'd come down, my mind racing. I had evidence now, the photos on my phone. But would it be enough? He could claim he knew nothing about it, that someone else must have been in the house. I needed more. I needed him to confess. The next morning, I acted normal. I made cinnamon rolls. I set the table. I smiled when Marcus came downstairs. But I watched him. I watched the way his eyes kept drifting to the basement door, checking. I watched the tiny furrow of concern between his eyebrows when we were all still alive and healthy. Amber came down around 9, yawning and smiling. "Merry Christmas," she said, hugging me. She was so trusting, so unaware of how close she'd come to death. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," I said, holding her a moment longer than usual. We had breakfast. Marcus was quieter than usual, distracted. He kept glancing at me, and I realized he was trying to figure out if I'd noticed anything. If I suspected, I needed help, but I couldn't call 911. Not yet. Not without solid proof. If they came and found nothing, if Marcus had somehow cleaned up the evidence before I could show them, I'd look like a paranoid old woman. He'd convince everyone that I was suffering from dementia, seeing threats where none existed, and then I'd be alone with him, vulnerable. So, I waited until Marcus went to take a shower. Then I turned to Amber. "Sweetheart," I said carefully, "I need to talk to you about something. It's important." She looked up from her phone, smiling. "Of course. What is it?" I took a deep breath. "Last night, I found something in the basement. Something that concerns me. About Marcus." Her smile faded. "What do you mean?" I showed her the photos on my phone. The disabled detector, the blocked vent, the tools. I watched her face change as understanding dawned. "No," she whispered. "No. That's not possible. Marcus would never." "Amber, listen to me. I need you to think. His first wife. He wasn't married before," she said automatically. Then she stopped. "Wait, you mean my first husband? How did he die?" "It was a boating accident. He fell overboard and drowned. They said he hit his head." She was very pale now. "Marcus wasn't even there. We hadn't met yet." "Are you sure? Think about the timeline. When exactly did your husband die? When did you meet Marcus?" I watched her thinking, calculating. James died in June. I met Marcus at a conference in July. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "But that's just coincidence. Marcus works in insurance. He goes to lots of conferences." "What kind of conference was it?" "Maritime insurance and risk assessment." Her voice had gone very quiet. "Oh my God. Amber, I need you to trust me. We need to be very careful about how we handle this. If Marcus suspects we know, the shower turned off upstairs. We both froze. Act normal, I whispered. Please. We'll figure this out. Amber nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She understood now. She was married to a man who killed people for money, who'd probably killed her first husband and manipulated her into falling in love with him so he could access her wealth. Marcus came back downstairs, his hair still damp. Ready to open presents? He asked cheerfully. We opened presents. We ate dinner. We played cards. And the whole time, I was planning. Amber and I communicated in glances, in careful touches. She was scared, but she was smart. She followed my lead. That night, after Marcus had gone to bed, Amber and I sat in the kitchen. We kept our voices low. I've been thinking, she said, about James, about how he died. Marcus told me he'd gone to that conference to learn about maritime risk assessment because he wanted to understand what happened to James, to help me through my grief. But what if she stopped, pressing her hands to her mouth? What if he was there to learn how to stage a boating accident? I finished quietly. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. He had access to James's boat. We'd been seeing each other for a few weeks before James died. Marcus said he wanted to meet him, to get his blessing for our relationship. They went out on the boat together, just the two of them. Marcus said it was a bonding thing. And then, a week later, James went out alone. He never came back. They found the boat drifting. Found him in the water 3 days later. The police said he'd been drinking, that he'd lost his balance and hit his head on the railing before falling overboard. She looked at me, but James didn't drink. He was recovering, had been sober for 5 years. I told the police that, but they said the autopsy showed alcohol in his system. Marcus would know how to make it look like drinking, I said. He works in insurance. He knows what makes an accidental death claim pay out versus what raises red flags. We sat there in silence for a long moment. Then Amber said, "We need to go to the police. We need to tell them everything." With what proof? Photos of a furnace that could have been accidentally blocked? Suspicions about deaths that were ruled accidental years ago. We need more. Then what do we do? I thought about it. About the boy I'd raised, the monster he'd become. About all the people who'd died because I hadn't seen what was right in front of me. We make him confess, I said finally. The next morning, I told Marcus I needed his help with something in the basement. The furnace is making that clicking sound again, I said. Could you take a look at it? You're so good with mechanical things. He followed me down the stairs, and I could feel the tension radiating from him. Did he know that I knew? Was he trying to figure out his next move? When we reached the basement, I turned to face him. Amber was upstairs with her phone, ready to call 911 if needed. But I had to try this. Marcus, I said quietly. I found what you did to the furnace. He went very still. What are you talking about? The blocked vent, the disabled detector. I know what you were trying to do. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, his face changed. The mask of the loving grandson slipped away, and what remained was cold and empty. When did you figure it out? He asked calmly. Last night. But I should have figured it out years ago. Mr. Patterson, Jennifer, Butterscotch. I paused. Your mother. He smiled, and it was the most chilling thing I'd ever seen. Mom was going to leave. Did you know that? She was going to take me away, move to California with some boyfriend I'd never met. I'd have lost you. Lost this house. Lost everything that was supposed to be mine. So you killed her, I whispered. You were 6 years old. I loosened the lug nuts on her car. I'd watched a video online about how to do it. The rain helped made it look more like an accident. I knew if she was gone, I'd get to stay here. With you. With all of this. He gestured around the basement, around the house. And I was right. And, Mr. Patterson, Jennifer, James. Mr. Patterson was easy. Sleeping pills in his nighttime tea. His heart was already bad, the pills just helped it along. Jennifer figured out I'd been stealing from her father's store, selling tools online. She was going to tell. I couldn't let that happen. As for James, he shrugged. Amber was worth more to me as a widow than as a divorced woman. James was a complication. And now? You were going to kill us all for insurance money? Not just insurance. This house is worth $500,000. Amber's properties, her investments together, everything would total about $8 million. That's worth one Christmas of carbon monoxide poisoning, don't you think? He took a step toward me. But now you've messed that up, so I'm going to have to improvise. The police are already on their way, I lied. Amber called them 20 minutes ago. He pulled out his phone, checked it. No, she didn't. I have monitoring software on both your phones. I know every call you make, every text you send. Very useful for staying ahead of problems. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. Then I recorded this entire conversation. His eyes flickered to my pocket, where my phone was indeed recording everything. For a moment, we stood there in that basement, grandmother and grandson, staring at each other. Then he lunged for the phone, but I was ready. I'd pressed send before we came downstairs, streaming the video live to a cloud service, with copies automatically sent to the police and to 3 different email addresses. Even if he destroyed my phone now, the confession was already out there. He realized it too. I saw the exact moment he understood that he'd lost. The calculation in his eyes, weighing his options, coming up empty. You stupid old woman, he said softly. I could have made it quick, painless. You'd have just gone to sleep and never woken up. But now, the basement door burst open. Police, hands where I can see them. Amber had called them after all, as soon as she heard Marcus admit to his mother's murder. They'd been listening outside, waiting for my signal. Marcus looked at me one last time. You should have let me do it, he said. You should have just died. Maybe, I said. But I didn't. And now everyone will know what you are. They arrested him there in the basement. Read him his rights while I stood on the stairs, watching. Amber came down and put her arm around me, and we stood there together while they led my grandson away in handcuffs. The trial took 9 months. They exhumed my daughter's body and found evidence that the car accident had been staged. They investigated Mr. Patterson's death and Jennifer's illness, James's drowning. The pattern was clear, undeniable. Marcus had been killing people since he was 6 years old, always for money or to remove an obstacle, always making it look like an accident. The psychologist who evaluated him said he was a textbook psychopath. No empathy, no remorse, only calculation and self-interest. She said there was no treatment, no cure. He would always be dangerous. The jury convicted him on 4 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. The judge gave him 4 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. I sold the house in Portland. Too many ghosts, too many memories of the boy I'd thought I was raising. Amber and I stayed in touch. She's seeing a therapist now, trying to process the trauma of loving a monster. She's slowly getting better. I moved to a small town in Vermont, bought a cottage by a lake. It's quiet here, peaceful. I spend my days reading, gardening, watching the water. Sometimes I think about Marcus, about where I went wrong, about what I should have seen. But mostly, I try to forgive myself. I try to be a good grandmother. I tried to raise him right. But you can't fix something that was never whole to begin with. Some people are born broken in ways that love can't repair. 3 months ago, I received a letter from prison. It was from Marcus. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Part of me wanted to burn it unread, but I needed to know what he had to say. The letter was short. In it, he told me he was sorry. Not for what he'd done, he was very clear about that. He wasn't sorry for the murders. He was sorry that he'd gotten caught. Sorry that his careful planning had unraveled. Sorry that he'd underestimated me. He ended the letter by saying that, in a way, I should be proud. He'd learned his attention to detail, his patience, his ability to plan for me. I'd taught him to be thorough, to think ahead, to consider all the angles. I read the letter twice. Then I walked to the fireplace, lit a match, and fed the pages to the flames. I watched them curl and blacken, watched my grandson's words turn to ash. Then I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the orange and pink sky like a mirror. A pair of loons called to each other across the water, their haunting cries echoing in the quiet evening. I'm 74 now. I've lived long enough to know that some questions don't have answers. Some wounds don't fully heal. Some losses can't be recovered. But I'm still here. I'm still breathing. I'm still watching the sun set and rise, still finding small moments of peace in the sound of wind through trees and water lapping at the shore. And that's enough. That has to be enough. Because at the end of the day, I survived. I saw the monster hiding behind my grandson's smile, and I lived to tell about it. That's more than Mr. Patterson got, more than Jennifer, more than my daughter Sarah, who died never knowing her own son had killed her. I survived. And sometimes, on the hard days, that's the only victory I need.